Go ahead and do what you need to do.
Good morning. I hope all of you are doing great. When we first lighted up this morning, I didn't see anyone on the call, and so I was going to move it forward out because I figured everybody was busy. So what I will do is just confirm that you can hear me. So I'm looking at the chat window. Can you hear me? Thank you, Emily. Okay, great. So this is part one of no voice. Okay, somebody said no voice. Loud and clear. Okay, so ARK, could you check your volume just to make sure that your sound is up? And we'll just proceed unless at least a couple of people tell me to stop, they can't hear me. Today we're going to talk about people who are transitioning from Infopath to PowerApps. And I'm particularly talking to those who are professional business forms and workflow designers. So you are, as part of your role in your job, you're building forms, you're building workflows for some business scenario. And in the past, you've used Infopath, and you're working on SharePoint Online. And now you're thinking about transitioning to PowerApps, or maybe you've even started working with PowerApps and you've noticed there's some differences. I want to take a little bit of time and kind of talk about why you'd want to transition to PowerApps and what are some challenges you're going to meet and how we are going to address those challenges so that this becomes an easier learning curve for you as you learn to get better at building forms, okay? Now, I did whiteboard a little bit, but the light in here isn't that great. So let me just tell you what I did whiteboard. I'm going to classify this discussion to be in a particular area. So I consider there's two key areas for those professional business forms designers. They're either particularly focused on forms, which means that they are building forms from a list, or they are building a single experience form. Maybe they have a new form and an edit form, but for the most part, they're building a form and they're focusing on that. And then there's this new wave of app designers. The app designers, the form is just an element of the overall app. So PowerApps addresses both of those requirements. And so what I'm going to do today is kind of talk heavily on the app, because next week on Thursday, when I have part two, that's going to talk about forms from a list very distinctly, because we'll have time to have released those new and exciting features at the upcoming Ignite convention. So in the meantime, though, everything that I say today will be beneficial to you, whether you are focused on building a single form or whether you're focused on using forms inside of an app. Okay, so let me just share screen and get this started. Sound is all good. I'm so happy to hear that. Okay, give me a second. All right, you should be seeing the deck now. Again, this is a part one of two. This one focusing on forms in general, but particularly in the scope of an app. Part two, which will be next Thursday, will be focused on, people who are building forms and they want to focus on list forms, okay? So we're going to have a lot of new stuff to show next week, and I have some new stuff to show you today as well. Okay, as usual, I want to point out, if you're new to PowerApps and you've never heard of it, it is simply a software as a service that is used for creating business applications across platforms. And what I mean by across platforms is you build one app, it works on your desktop, it works in iOS, it works in Android, it works in Windows Phone, it works on the desktop, it works on the big screen in the hallway, it works on the Surface Hub, it just works everywhere. Okay. And that's huge because back in the day, and I'm going to say maybe 2 years ago, we had to build an app for each platform. So now we've got the ability to build across platforms and across Microsoft Cloud services. So across Office 365, Dynamics 365, and Azure. And we do this in a basic 3-step process. Step 1, connecting to data. And often we'll talk about the common data service or the common data model, which is a schema that will enable you to build an app once, use it in Office 365, use it in Dynamics 365, leverage Azure functions and functionality without having to change that app, because there's a standard schema that can be ported across our cloud services. Or you can connect to other software as a service situations, such as something like a Trello or a Slack or a Box or a Dropbox, or your own data sources, which is the ones that you make. You can create custom APIs and then connect to your own line of business applications. But usually when it comes to applications, you are starting with some type of connection to data. And this is kind of big, even for the forms world, because there are some form scenario where you basically start by just jumping in and building your form. You can do that in Power Apps. It's not impossible, but it will be easier for you to start by connecting to data, because the data will give you visibility into how your form is being configured. So after we have a connection to data, moving on to the configuration of the app or the form, we add screens, we add controls. A form is a control, and so is a Dropbox, so is a data table. All of these are types of things that you add to screens in your app, and you can do all of that configuration and have a working application without having to write any code. Then finally, when you're ready, and no sooner and no later than when you're ready, you can publish those apps directly to your organization and enable your organization to be more efficient by the use of these apps in many different ways, but both from the level of productivity, ERM, CRM. These are all ways that you can enhance your organization's processes and procedures by supplementing them with these easy to handle apps. So basically that's what Power Apps is, but it's so deep. We can talk about Power Apps a lot. Today, we're going to talk mostly about forms. Now, there are some webinars that have already happened, and I think it's really important for me to tell you that if you're serious about building forms in Power Apps, then these 3 links are actually extremely important to you. I'm going to try and get rid of this little, yes. These 3 links are extremely important to you because they carry the bulk of the what is a form and how does a form work. So the article on the bottom is something that you read. It's called Understanding Power Apps Forms. It was written by Greg, and it is one of the first articles that I read personally on the Power Apps site, even before I came to Microsoft. And that article did leaps and bounds for my learning curve. So I would suggest it kind of be one of the things that you plan to read from top to bottom. It is worth every minute of your reading time. Then these other 2 webinars, the one at the top, Getting Started, I did that a while back, but it still applies. It kind of shows you the different parts of a form and kind of talks to you about forms. Now, I'm going to give you some updates on that webinar today, but I don't want to be redundant, so I'm going to suggest you do watch that webinar. It's not completely outdated. The principles, the formulas, they still apply. And then finally, one of my favorite all-time webinars is the one that Kartik did about rapidly building applications with Power Apps Studio. He went into some of those popular concepts like repeating tables and how to bind your data table to your galleries and how to bind display forms to your gallery. He did a really great job of kind of targeting all the things that most Infopath developers will need to do. So if you have to miss the other 2, definitely watch Kartik's webinar if you don't get to look at the other 2. But if you're really serious, I suggest all 3 links on this screen are a priority. Now, I want to kind of talk about transition targets. So when we think about why should I leave Infopath and head into PowerApps, this is not all about Microsoft strategy. This is about the modern workforce and what the workforce needs. So there's basically 3 targets I'm going to talk about in part 1, and then I have 3 more targets that I'm going to talk about in part 2. But in each of these targets, I'm going to give you some tips. So there'll be 3 tips for each one and then an extra one for the mobile access, right? Because you know that happens to be one of my passions. But if you look at these targets, you'll start to see why we're making this change. We want to change how the consumer of the app experiences it, okay? So we start with optimizing consumer experiences. We want our consumers to feel like they enjoy doing that they found it quick and easy to do, that whatever they went to do, they got it done. They accomplished their goal. And in reality, isn't it great if we can show our consumers that they can do one thing and accomplish multiple tasks? And these are the experiences that we want to target when we're building applications, right? So we don't just want to replicate maybe our old-fashioned form design. We want to see if we can kick it up a notch and generate this kind of emotion when people are using our applications, right? And then the next thing, and I think PowerApps is well suited for all of that because it facilitates your ability to enhance the experience, to add media, to take advantage of where the user's standing, what they're doing, what device they're using. Really easy when you're working with PowerApps. I am an ex-Infopath designer. I would say, I guess I still do Infopath. If my customer were to say, hey, can you edit this form? I would be glad to do that. But I am so impressed with what I can do in PowerApps that was in actuality more difficult for me when I was working in Infopath. Some of those experience goals that I had were more difficult. Then the second target we have is optimizing integrations, right? And here's what we want our consumers to feel on this, right? I didn't worry about where data was located. So our consumers shouldn't care where the data is, whether it be in Dynamics or SharePoint or SQL. It doesn't matter. It should not matter to them. They should have a seamless experience where they get, and the second one, they get the information that they need when they need it, and they don't have to jump around to a lot of different places. So PowerApps facilitates these type of integrations, and you'll see as we talk about the tips for pro designers, what you want to think about in that area. And then finally, you want to make sure when you're optimizing integrations that the flow of the application is coherent, logical, and relevant to the consumer. And so they want to feel that. They don't want to feel a clunkiness. They don't want to feel any type of stoppage as they're working or confusion as they're working. And then so when we integrate data, and what I mean by that specifically is when we add more than one data source into an app, we need to make that a seamless situation. And from a maker perspective, it's a lot easier than it used to be. But even from a consumer perspective, we want to make that seamless. And then finally, we want to target optimizing mobile access. I mean, this was a big thing, you know, a couple of years back, we were talking about cloud first, mobile first, but go beyond that idea to the idea of enablement, not only wherever and whenever you'd like, right? But in a format that is applicable to wherever and whenever they are. So, for instance, think of a Surface Hub being used for an app that would help me, or a platform, a touch screen in a hallway being used for an app to help me get to a conference room, right? The way I designed that application so that they can touch the screen and maybe the different conference room lights up where they want to go, and maybe it gives them a path to get to that conference room. Those are the kind of things that PowerApps makes easy compared to, say, what I might have to do that exact same experience in Infopath. So I like to really pay attention to the opportunities that PowerApps presents to me, brand new opportunities that I may not have had before. So, and that's what made me fall in love with Power Apps. All of a sudden, I was enabled to do things that took a lot longer in the past. So let's take these 3 targets kind of one at a time and look at how you want to think about this as you start transitioning to Power Apps, okay? So when we talk about optimizing customer experiences, I want to talk about 3 specific things. 1, being aware that you can actually target more than one user interface. You can have both a list form on Sharepoint that is operating, that looks great on a page in Sharepoint, and you can have an app that works on a mobile device. And you can have an app that works in a hallway screen. And you can build all 3 of those experiences directly in Power Apps. So as I had said earlier, you can build it once, it works everywhere, but think about the opportunity you have to target certain scenarios, because you most definitely can, all right? Now, I'm gonna give you some examples of where I might do this, but linking applications is another thing that I think you should think about. Linking application means I open this application, and maybe I'm going to do something in this application as a consumer, but when I go to that next coherent process step, it may, behind the scenes, open up another app, okay? And you can have a sequence of apps. As you open one, you do something that provokes the opening of another one. And I wanted to kind of, before I go to number 3, kind of show you an example of where I did the link applications. And so I don't know if you guys know, but every year we have a hackathon at Microsoft where we build something in a couple of days, and then we talk about it, and it's a big challenge, and everybody gets excited about it. The app that I built was for a sports team that, a sports, I guess I would say, a fighter, so a boxer situation, where they were testing people who were named fighters. Now, this was a very important hackathon because it involved helping people with Parkinson's disease. And if you're interested in hearing about the project, I will tell you about it at another time. But I just want to show you that in the case of this particular app, what I did was I had a situation where the fighter did one thing on a stable mobile device, and then when they got done, they passed the device back to the trainer, who then pressed a button which launched another app. And the way you do this is you pass parameters when you launch the app. And I just kind of want to show you what that looks like. Give it a second to open up. This can help also with performance. So let's suppose you end up with a 50 screen app. That's scary even for me, right? Remember back in the day when we used to do SharePoint lists with 50 managed metadata columns, and then we realized that wasn't a great idea? Well, it's the same kind of thing with Power Apps. The less controls we have, the more performant it will be. So one of the things I like to point out to people is you can reduce the amount of screens you have by linking applications. I'm just gonna go to page here, and then I'm going to X out of this because I needed to pick a fighter first. And now I'm going to go to another screen, and because I'm not going to show you the entire app because it's a pretty complex app. And I'm going to go to this screen, and I'm going to zoom into this screen. And you'll notice this button here, and I'm going to point out the select statement here. So in the select statement of this button, you will notice, and I kind of wish, let me see if I zoom a little bit more. Probably that's the biggest it's going to get. But what we're getting, we actually have a function called launch. And the launch function, I think I've talked about it before. The launch function, if you just use it alone with a URL in quotes, literally it's just going to launch that page. So I know some people, and also myself, have used the launch to open pages in SharePoint directly from the app. And yes, I will get a magnifier. I don't have one on here today. Good point, Wes. So when I launch the app, when I launch that page, I also can add, if you notice, I put a comma here. This is not a new function, is I'm adding it to the launch function. I'm adding a value, name, and a value. And you can see the syntax here up above. Launch, start with the address, and then the value, the name and the value, the name and the value. So the name of my parameter is the fighter name, which I'm passing. And then I also am getting that from a control in this app. And then I'm passing an affiliate name. And both of those are coming from a label device. Now, when I launch the second app, just show you how you receive that in your app. Give it a second to open up. Getting things ready, that sounds really positive. And now we're loading up all that goodness. And in here, you'll notice that the fighter is blank, but there is a field here called DD Fighter. So I'm just going to look for the drop-down fighter name here. And just get to DD Fighter, sorry, boom, 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 fighter name. So I have a, hold on, I just kind of lost my fighter name, 1 second. DD Fighter, okay. Notice that in the DD Fighter control, I have the text set to be the parameter fighter name. Now, this middle piece here that says param fighter name in quotes is basically all you need when you're passing parameters. You don't need anything else. Now, I want to be transparent with you. You know I always am. The reason why this particular function has the substitute as well, and substitute is a function that enables you to take some type of text and substitute it with something else. The reason I'm using the substitute is because right now, and we're working on changing this, when we pass a profile name, the display name, instead of a space between the last name and the first name, there's actually a plus sign. And so what I'm using is I'm using the substitute function to replace that function, that plus sign, with a space. Now, once we fix that and it comes across without the plus sign, substitute will not hurt this app at all. It will continue to work. It didn't find a plus sign, it moves on. But this is how you pass a param. So you can pass a param into any control or to any of your form logic from the previous app. So that previous app would actually have to have that param in the launch statement. And then once it gets to the app, then you would actually grab that parameter wherever you might need it using the param function. And I'll make sure you get a link to the substitute and param functions in the text below. But this worked out really well for us in improving performance of the two apps, and also basically in the creation of the apps, because it enabled us to work on two different apps at the same time, and then we just link them together in the end. And so it helped in a lot of different ways. So think about the opportunity that you might have to link your applications. Okay, so think about that. I just wanted to show you how, because to get you to think about it, you're going to have to think about it. When it comes to the apps versus list forms, you're going to get more about that as we get into next week and all the goodness that we'll be releasing next week. But basically right now, you can build a form without any other page. Just remember to set the default value to edit. And I guess I should have shown you that. So let me just quickly show you that. I am going to go into a new layout here. When you insert a edit form, this one doesn't have any data, but you don't need the data to understand what I'm saying. there is a default mode here called default mode property for that form. It defaults, it should default by default when you insert it. And that is good when you want to create just a form, right? You would do default mode is edit. And so that should be by default. And then the other thing you want to check in the form properties is the item property. So when the item property is blank, then you have no item previously selected. So when you make an app from data, your item property will always say like gallery 1 selected, because it's going to show whatever was selected in the previous screen or from the top screen. So you don't need an item property when it comes to new form modes. And so just keep that in mind, that you need to kind of understand your data source is what the source of the data is for the form. Basically, where is it going to submit to? Your default mode is whether this form opens up in edit mode or display mode by default. And then the item property is only needed when you're editing existing data. And it is ignored when it's a new item form. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're trying to like build a form that is just a form and you don't want anything else, and you're in the scenario of an app, okay, versus the customized forms you've heard about at the virtual summit that we had on Sharepoint. That is a little bit different, and we'll talk about that next week. Okay. And then finally, this last point that I have under improving consumer experiences is enabling cross-site and service transactions and workflow. So when we were dealing with Infopath and when we were dealing with SharePoint Designer, without the benefit of code behind, we were restricted to the site collection, and often the site for any CRUD operations like create, read, update, delete. Remember that in the scenario of PowerApps, you don't have those boundaries. You can cross software as a service, not only Microsoft's, but external. We have many connectors that enable you to connect in a create, read, update, delete fashion to other software as a service. And your workflow can move around between those services, between SharePoint sites. You now have the freedom. You have no fence around you when it comes to building applications. And I just want to show you an example of what I mean. I'm going to flip back over to this particular SharePoint site, and I want to show you a scenario. So imagine a scenario where you have contractors that are submitting change orders, right? And those change orders are going to change their contract value and or schedule. So I hope that's a scenario that you've seen in the past at least. So I basically have a SharePoint list where I have a list of my contractors and their current contract value. This list could be on a top level SharePoint site, like the executive site, right? That site could hold the current contract value and the current duration for those contractors. But when they go in and submit a change order on that contract, right? Even if each contractor has a different site, when they submit their change order, on approval of a change order, we can have Flow go in and edit the value of the contract, whether it be the cost or the schedule, in that upper level site, keeping our executives always up to date on the actual baseline for that particular contract. And yet the contractors themselves may be working in this site and never see that top level scenario. So Flow can do that. And I don't know if you've noticed that not only can Flow cross different site collections and different services, but actually it can take on an account name and run a flow against that account name, so that the person who is using this list doesn't have to have access to the list that is being used for executive visibility on the contract value. So this is something I've actually done quite a bit. And it just means getting involved in using Flow and understanding that there are no more boundaries. You don't have those SharePoint Designer boundaries anymore when it comes to where you can initiate an action or where you can track triggers. So keep that in mind as you think about transitioning to to PowerApps from Infopath. Remember the added value you're going to get from that situation, where you can actually easily manage automation, workflow, and/or transactions anywhere you want to. Integrations. I want to talk about integrations. And again, I'll save time for questions. I'm kind of watching the clock. Integrations, you want to remember that PowerApps will facilitate the combination of on-premise and cloud-based scenarios. Okay, so just like you can create a Power App from a SharePoint list, you can add a SQL gateway to that app and connect to your SQL data on-premise and vice versa. You might have data in SQL Azure, and now you can connect to SharePoint gateway to get the SharePoint data on premises. This is huge, and the reason that this is so huge is because of how easy it is to do. The gateway, the creation of the gateway, I think maximum 30 minutes if you follow Archana's instructions, and we'll kind of have her come back every now and then to walk us through that. And then after you have the gateway set up, basically you're back where you always were. So it like facilitates you to continue working as you've been working, but yet connect to data wherever it might be. This is huge. I remember looking at number 5 here. I remember back in the day, and again, I'm not going very far back in the day, maybe 5 years or so, maybe even less, how much time it took to integrate Dynamics into SharePoint. I don't know if any of you have ever done this. Shout out on the chat here. How many of you have been involved in integrations where you had to put Dynamics logic on SharePoint or vice versa, or you had to use SharePoint as the document library for Dynamics? This kind of thing in my day was pretty common, yet it could take 3 to 6 months to do, right? Because there's coordination between the devs and Dynamics, and there's coordination between the devs and SharePoint, and there's a lot of moving pieces involved in that kind of integration. Now you plug and play. You can plug in, Wes says, considered for multiple clients, just skipped at the time because of the pain and expense to create and then manage. Exactly, Wes. And I've lived through it, even here at Microsoft. We've done this before, right here at Microsoft when I was a supplier. But it's when you think about how Power Apps, you just go and add the connection to Dynamics, and there you go. You're off and running, right? Or you synchronize Dynamics data with your common data model or your common data service, and now you have it accessible wherever you need it. And so it's like, wow. I mean, so if you're considering a transition to Power Apps, this would be a huge factor in my urgency of getting up to speed and getting involved in Power Apps, because it's definitely worth the ease of integration when it comes to Dynamics and SharePoint and other scenarios of that nature. I know in the DevOps world, we often wanted to integrate Trello with Slack or Yammer with VSTS. So those kind of DevOps scenarios are now plug and play and off you go. So remember that we have our docs on the connector, and I will continue to put the link for that on the bottom too. What I did that I suggest that you do is I actually started going through the connectors. I actually said insert connection, and I looked at the ones that were most relevant to me. And then what I did was I put them, and maybe I'll show you this. Let's see if I can show you this without, well, I'm afraid that my OneNote might have some interesting stuff in it. So instead of showing you my OneNote, I will explain that in my OneNote, I have a list of all the connectors that I'm interested in. Now, what makes me interested in it? My customers, my business scenarios, right? Whoever's reaching out to me for help, that's what makes me interested in a particular connector. And I'll group them. So like I have a group called project management connectors, and I'll have project online, I'll have planner, I'll have, anything that has to do with project VSTS, I'll have that in that section. I might have a section for internal social, which would have Yammer, which might have Slack. And so I start to group into a single page on OneNote the different connectors that interest me and my customers. And then I start testing them. And this is where you get ahead of your customers, you get ahead of your business scenarios, and you start understanding how the connectors work even before you need to use them, just because you know which connectors are most popular in your particular industry or environment. So I suggest you do that. I learned a lot. I've tested about 25% of our connectors. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but again, I'm still working on it, and I hope to get through at least 50% by the end of this quarter, and then next year I'll finish the rest. But I've started with the most important connectors, of course: SharePoint, SQL, VSTS, Planner, the ones that are most common in my world: Outlook, Mail, and Office 365 users. These are all very popular connectors. So when you think about integrations, start looking at the connectors and just play with them, learn how the functionality works. Reach out in the forum on data connectors, and I'll show you that right at the end, where you can ask questions specifically about data and data connections. We just opened up a brand new forum dedicated to that. Then remember number 6 here. Don't just think about one brand. Enable your customers to share many different types of software as a service. When you leverage different software as a service, you actually expand the capability of the application as well, because these applications can be complementary, right? So don't hesitate in your planning to leverage many. This is something I don't think we thought of even as Infopath designers, the idea of leveraging other software as a service like Trello or Salesforce, or we didn't even think about that. I don't think, those of you that did, whoa, 10 points, but I don't know, I didn't get to that thinking. But now you can think about that. You can sit in front, if you're a consultant, you can sit in front of your customer with the confidence that whatever they're using, you can connect to it, no big thing. Third thing is optimizing mobile access. And so I want to redefine mobile in Audrey's way today. Mobile doesn't mean phone. Mobile means it's available while I'm moving. So I'm outside, I'm in my building, I'm in the store, I'm wherever I am, and I have access to this thing. So the data, the application is available to me when I'm mobile. So think of me as mobile and what's available to me when I'm mobile. So yes, definitely the phone is definitely one of those. But there are a lot of scenarios for mobile, right? And this is where we innovate, and we have the ability to kind of scale out what kind of experience can we share with people inside of a building, at a store, in your purse, and so there's in a school, right? You could think of a school library with an app in the front. I can think of a ton of industry-specific scenarios for mobility with apps. And so anything that's not really the desktop that you're sitting in front of or the laptop, think of that as mobile, right? And so and when you're doing mobile, you want to do this tip number 7, which is seek to drive faster form entry. So, and I think I've showed you this before, but I'm going to show it to you working. So let me just go to this particular app, and so I can show you exactly what I mean by faster form entry. So I'm going to go back to PowerApps, and I'm going to close that one and not save it. I'm going to actually open up this one, which you may have seen before. And all I did was take the app details and put it in a OneNote so that I could get there quickly. Just for the presentation. I wouldn't need to do that in real life, of course. Okay, so this particular app was written for a phone, and specifically the customer wanted to use this on the phone. So it was designed for the phone and it's used on the phone. But if you look at the SharePoint list for this app, it basically has 4 columns. It has a column for the name of the user that's submitting the form. I think it has, because later on somebody could actually change the person who logged it in, like they could log it for somebody else. But in most cases, it was always the individual logging. Then there was a column for the temperature. There was a column for humidity. And there's a column, Yes, I think that was it. The date and the time of the log. Okay. So when you think about making it easier and faster, you don't want people typing on a tiny phone, right? So, and you don't know how large the phone are. Like I have the smaller iOS device. Somebody else might have the large one. You don't know, right? So you want to make it pretty touch friendly. So in this case, I decided to just have two simple icons at the top. When you change the icon that you've selected, one of them gets darker than the other, then this little slider down here basically enables you to select that value. So what I'm saying is that the temperature is 76 degrees, and it kind of gives me a validation down here in this label. And then this particular thing here, and I've totally blogged about this. You'll find the blog about this. I'll put a link. You could know exactly how I did this. But the point being this time is you're looking for ways to make it finger friendly. They tap the cloud, which is about humidity, and then they move the slider again. And now they've got both the humidity reading and the temperature reading. And all they have to do is press submit. Now, when they press submit, this is going to a SharePoint list that still looks like it used to look before. It has the columns, it has a list view, and you see this in an Excel data format. But notice that I've changed kind of how the app is used so that the user could get through this in 4 taps, 5 taps, they're done. They don't have to pull up a screen or a keyboard or anything. They can work very quickly. This is something, again, I found difficult to do using Infopath, even though I love it. Don't think I'm against Infopath. I love the tool, and I did cry when I heard it was going to have an end of life, because I had years of Infopath. I love it. But what I can do with PowerApps versus what I could do with Infopath as far as the speed to delivery. What I mean is not just me making the app, but the consumer getting their tasks done faster. And that makes me happy. Plus, in these applications, I can integrate reporting. In my SharePoint list, I don't know how many of you have ever done that. Anybody on the chat ever done reporting using SharePoint? So maybe you did an XLST type of a template, or you did some kind of ASP.NET thing, or you connected Excel's Power Query to it, or you connected. Have any of you had to create reporting in SharePoint for like something that an Infopath list, the list is collecting? Let me know if you have. That was something pretty typical in my world, where I had to like build a way to report out on what was going on. And so that's, pretty, when you think about that, that's pretty huge, having to figure out how to report out on these things. And now we can actually integrate that directly into the app. And here's where maybe big screen services will become really beneficial. You can actually, you learned this from Data Insights, right? Where Philip showed us how beautiful we can add an app to a Power BI dashboard, and vice versa. We can add a tile from Power BI in Power Apps. So imagine like that change order app that I have. Imagine that the splash screen basically says what our current cost is, what our current schedule health is. And then as we drill into the app, we can perform transactions. But the app actually integrates the idea of reporting right in the app. And to me, there's nothing better than that. I'm kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And I don't know if that's a good thing to say, but I feel that, right? I don't know about you, but whenever I can solve 2 problems at the same time, I'm happy. And so are my customers, right? Number 8, I want to talk about number 8, but I think you got this, so you know this already, but I said it because it matters. One thing that we could not do with Infopath on the mobile scenario is leverage any of that mobile technology. The cameras on the phone, the ability to record on that phone, the location awareness of the phone. And there's more, right? There's more. You'll be surprised. There are things coming that you probably haven't even thought of yet when it comes to leveraging the phone technologies. So don't hesitate to go ahead and get started on that. And you'll see that we're going to be surprising you with some cool things. I know a lot of you are talking about images and how do we store them, and a lot of surprises coming in part 2 that we'll be able to show you. Now, in addition to that, you want to offer big screen services that hallway monitor that shows the Power BI dashboard, but maybe it has an app right in it. So let's suppose it's a change order dashboard. It shows us the change order for all the contractors of the project, but there's an app in there that allows you to walk by and add a comment about a particular change order. Maybe that's the floor where the resident engineers work, and they just want to be able to comment on those, or they want to deny them right from the hallway if they need to, or approve them. You could enable them to do that right in their hallway on their way to their meeting. You never know, right? You can also give them directions to a room. In a hospital, you can enable an awareness for the nursing staff as to who needs what and where. I mean, there are so many opportunities for big screen services, and PowerApps does that. That's a whole new level of mobility. What's available to me as I'm walking down the hall, as I'm going into the store, as I'm coming out of the store? Think about things like that. PowerApps is awesome for that. And then finally, enabling offline scenarios. Carlos did a great blog on offline scenarios. I was going to kind of walk through it, but we've run out of time, so I won't be able to walk through it. I'll save it for part 2. But part 2 will have a lot on customized list forms. It will have a lot of demo on form attachments. We'll talk about combo controls. We'll talk about how you can decide how to map your Infopath form. And so when we think about decision tree, don't expect the typical, if-then statement. What I'm going to do is help you decide, should this be a single form list, or should this be an app with multiple screens? Should it be mobile? Should it be desktop? Should it be agnostic to where it lives? How do you make those decisions so that you optimize your ability to build the best forms for the scenarios you're working in? So I'm going to open it up for questions because I went a little over time that I thought I was going to do. Let me know if this makes sense to you. If you have any, yes, Wes, I know, me and you both talking about GPS. We do have location for now, but I am talking about GPS. So and this is like something, GPS has to be, I guess, delineated into what are we looking for with GPS? JPT, is there any resource to train a team on PowerApps development? So when you say development, do you mean building apps, or do you mean building custom APIs or custom connectors, or leveraging Azure functions? So that the pro dev layer, JPT. Let me know which tier you're talking about. Are you talking about a power user building an app, developing an app, or designing an app, or are you talking about the developers who are extending those apps? Ricardo, any additional resources to learn more on the matter? Okay, Ricardo, I am so avidly working on giving you a lot of training resources. And in this topic particularly, we're working on best practices, we're working on a white paper, and we're working on further webinars to clarify all the features that support business form and workflow designers. So Ricardo, yes. We will have more. Right now, we don't have enough obvious, but you'll see this light up next week in relation to Infopath specifically, and you'll get more content. I can also add some links in the description here. Sharepoint has published quite a bit of content from the summit that was just this year. So I'll be able to share the summit with you, the links from the summit. Thank you, Ricardo. There are so many resources. Start on PowerApp sites with documentation, tutorials. Yes, thank you, Wes. Good point. And that's what you should do. And those links that I had pointed out to you earlier, I really believe you should not skip these 3 links. If nothing else, please read these 3 links. And then they will link you off to other things. So it kind of make it a little bit less intimidating. There might be a lot of stuff. Where do I start? Start with these. That article on the bottom will link you to other things, and then you'll kind of build from there. You are so welcome. All of you are welcome. I heard it's possible to use Power Query within PowerApps. Could you comment on that? So what we can do is we can put a Power BI tile into a Power App, and we can use Power Query with CDS. And we're going to actually have a special webinar about Power Query and CDS soon. I'm working on getting the right people into that webinar, Jacob. And then finally, UB4000, will Ignite sessions on PowerApps be webcasts? I cannot be sure on that right this moment. I know that some of them are, like the keynotes, but I'm not sure on every single presentation. I'll check with marketing and I'll let you guys know in the description. All right. Thank you so much. This has been fun. I'm glad I was able to share why I love this transition from Infopath to PowerApps and why I think there's a lot you can leverage here to increase the value of your business forms and workflow. Again, I wish you the best Power App experience, and please let me know if I can do anything to help. Post it on the forum and the community. Remember, we have new forums. It's called the Best Practices for App Building. That's where you can post like your questions on data connections or even add your own apps. So please do that. Try and do that soon. I have to stop, otherwise YouTube won't let me cut. You have a great day, and I will be talking to you next week, Thursday. You're welcome.